Solomon, thank you for pointing out that my whole monologue was hosed. So don't worry, there was nothing particularly interesting except that back there the mini bar water price is $15 a bottle. So don't do that. Um, I'm here in Las Vegas, Nevada for Dev Intersections and the Azure AI conference, which means that we won't have quite the same audio quality. We do have the same number of audio quality foibles, like me forgetting to set up the speaker outlay to Twitch, which I guess happens, is appropriate in a desert. Yeah, although you could go to Walgreens and get, your 50-cent bottle of water or 30-cent bottle of water. And I'm sure if you went to an actual grocery store, it would be even cheaper than that. So that's why I say don't buy. You don't need the minibar. Just go out and take a $20 drive to a ride share to get to a Walgreens where you can pay less. I think actually if you drink two bottles, it'll still be cheaper than that. It'll still be cheaper than going to the Walgreens. Um, this episode of Shop Talk sponsored by Walgreens. So uh, we have board elections that are currently going on, and as is normal, when we do have one person who volunteered to run for each position, we have a quick up or down poll on whether you would approve of this person or these people as board member. And unfortunately, Meetup got rid of polling functionality this year, which means I could create a poll someplace else and essentially run the risk that if you are not a member of the group, that you would still be able to vote on the membership, which is against the bylaws of our organization. And we are nothing if not stringently following all of the bylaws of our organization. At least when somebody reminds me that, hey, do you remember that election thing that you guys have? Uh, in fairness, in my mind, it is still March of 2020, so I time has
As
lost
it
all
is
meaning.
for most of us. Yeah.
But I do want to say, take a moment and check for that email that you will have received about the board elections and do a quick vote, yes or no. It's going to be a straight up or down vote, both people or not both people. And in the event that not both people ends up winning, then we'll have a runoff style system. But because we don't have anybody who's competing for one of the roles, it's just Mike running for vice president of membership and Tracy running for vice president of programs. Straight up or down vote. Hopefully, we get a lot of those votes in over the next week or so. Mike,
Is it considered stuff? Is it considered stuffing the ballot if you vote for yourself?
it is not. It is considered stuffing the ballot if you vote for yourself multiple times.
Ah, okay.
So I know you set up 25 Yahoo accounts for this purpose.
Mike CO2, Mike CO3. I don't know how you knew it was me.
I have a team of forensic engineers. They dig through all of the emails. Also, uh, they all had the same signature. You probably should change your signature in your emails for the fake
I
ones.
can't. It's DocuSign. It's so valid, you know.
So yeah, please do vote for board elections. And next up, we have two more meetings before we close out the year. The first one is not tomorrow, but next Tuesday. So I will be back in my normal abode with my normal microphone and fancy speakers. Um, John Morehouse is going to talk to us about accelerated database recovery. Speaking of fancy speakers, and then the Tuesday after that, so the third Tuesday of December, Mala is going to talk to us about script DOM. So we've got a couple more really good meetings left on the calendar. Hopefully, we'll see you at those. Apparently, mentioning Mala caused her to leave momentarily, but it's okay. Mala's back, um, and life is good. So, next topic on the agenda is a little bit of reflecting on the year. I'm hopeful that folks in chat you'll chime in with this because I want this to be almost in lieu of sending out a membership survey because I tend to do that every 2 years. So in these odd years, because apparently it's not 2020 anymore, it's 2021 somehow. Um, we'll have something a little less formal. And I do want to say, hey, if you're a member of TriPass, thank you for being part of TriPass. If you're watching this, you're probably a TriPass member. I don't know why you wouldn't if you weren't already a member at meetup.com/TRIPASS. But perhaps there's a underground culture of people who watch Shop Talk without actually being members of the organization.
Hi, Mom.
Yeah. So thank you for being part of TriPass, and I do want to ask what types of things you'd like to hear or see from the group in the year 2022. We are fortunate enough that we already have a lot of the early year prepped out, but there is some flexibility, especially as we get later in the year, to try to get an idea of topics, of sessions, of speakers, of even general themes. And we're probably going to stick with the same three major themes of advanced DBA, main meeting, and data science slash BI. I think that concept worked out pretty well this year. And so as long as we're able to fill the billet easily enough, we'll keep moving forward with those. But if there are specific ideas, topics you want to see covered, put those in chat. We'll keep track of those. We'll try to hunt down speakers who are good on the topic and go from there. I know that we will probably spend at least a couple of sessions in 2022 with what's new in SQL Server 2022. And my guess is those will probably be, I don't know, early to mid-year, because at that point we'll have enough information. At the very least, CTPs will be available, and maybe the product will have gone GA by then. So we will definitely talk about what's in SQL Server 2022. Not right now. There's just not enough to talk about yet. It's all extremely high level. If you can't get access to the demos, there's not much to talk about. But aside from that, definitely open to other themes, topics, and speakers. Also, another idea that I want to talk about, broach, and I haven't even talked about it with these folks, with my fine board members, or at least technically we would count as a quorum of the board. But this is not a board meeting. This is Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. I had to say that again because my
Sponsored by Walgreens.
CVS, you could get in on this action for just a little bit more. But reintroducing in-person meetings. So getting a feeling for how many people would be interested in having the option to meet in person again. We would still be broadcasting online because folks that may remember back in the olden days, we were hosting our meetings in person, but also broadcasting them over Twitch in 2019. So we were a little bit ahead of that curve, and all of that video equipment is still hanging around in my office, which means that as we go in person again, we'll have the opportunity to do broadcasts, simulcasts in person and remote. But I am certainly interested in hearing what folks think, if this is, if it's time, or if you want to hold off, if you just don't want to do it at all in person again. Definitely want to hear thoughts on the topic. Also, I would note that even if we do in person, it's probably not until at least spring or summer. I wouldn't expect it until at the very earliest spring, but that's because I don't want to drive in snow.
I'm for it. I mean, I'm absolutely for it.
You wouldn't have your amazing backdrop that you normally do. The
Oh, right, yeah.
the walls, the crystal walls. Solomon says, yes, it's almost like Kevin was aware of an impending worldwide lockdown that would require the group to go fully online. Makes you think. It makes you think.
Well, there's some of the ML predictive analytics in Azure because that was the last in person one of them, right? It wasn't it the young lady from Microsoft. She's talking about ML services. That was like a couple before we left.
That was, yeah, you're right.
Anna, is it Anita or Anna?
Anna Hoffman.
Anna,
That's
Anna.
right. Yeah. So I remember that one. It wasn't far off.
So Anna, by the way, since you brought it up, Anna's among the few people. I don't think there's anybody else, but Anna wants to present at our first live meeting. Well, she's from around here, by the way. She
Oh,
wants to visit her parents and such, and she wants to come and present when we go live. So I told her I'll keep her posted. She's a great presenter, by the way. So it would be a good way to start live meetings if we happen to get there.
Yeah, Anna is a great presenter.
Yeah.
Um, so Rednello says, I like the idea of finally getting to meet everyone and put faces with names. That's there are some major advantages to having in-person meetings. I think this light is harsh. All right, so the light's going to get progressively worse because that light is unbearable. Um, there is a lot of value in the in-person aspect of these sorts of user groups where we get to know each other. I think Anders is a bot. Well, even after you meet him in person, it's still arguable.
He's a very convincing bot, that's for sure.
I believe he would technically be an android at that point.
it's Turing complete.
He is well, mostly Turing complete. Yes. He may or may not be able to pass a Turing test, but in fairness, I've known actual humans who have difficulty passing a Turing test. Um, so there are some advantages to meeting in person. The ability to socialize with people and make contacts is a lot easier to do in an in-person setting than it is in an online setting. It's the contacts are more meaningful. It's getting to the uh, our developed monkey brains, where if you're not in person, I don't know if you really exist. That's a very crude and crass way of putting it, but there there is a lot that we do put on familiarity and on the people who I can actively see on a regular basis. It kind of gives a third dimension to them in our brains. In person would be fine, depending on who will be there, says Solomon. But so far, Kevin has failed to mail us our 2 slices of pizza per meeting, so we're just going to have to do it in person at this point. So I keep mailing them to you, Solomon. I don't know why you don't get them. Everybody else is getting them.
They come in these cute envelopes that are like that.
I think the grease just melts through the paper. But uh, that's another advantage, yeah. And somebody else pays for the food. Um, my neighbor must be stealing them from the mailbox. That's probably it. Yes, that's probably the reason. Definitely blame your neighbors. Don't blame me. And Mala also brought up that she's getting a little bit of push about SQL Saturday Raleigh, and it's all in jest. It's all good fun, but the idea of a SQL Saturday in 2022, we haven't had any discussions at all about SQL Saturday. I don't want to do one online. I don't think virtual SQL Saturdays
Mhm.
are useful, um, or at least not in the sense that a SQL Saturday is useful. I mean, the whole point of a SQL Saturday is community, and
Mm.
in 2020, when okay, nobody could get to these places, having a few SQL Saturdays makes a lot of sense. But given that they're geographically themed, really the only thing that virtual SQL Saturday Miami was different from virtual SQL Saturday Bangladesh is just their time zone.
Yeah.
And we didn't want to do that. We want to have that in-person experience. But I saw what happened in Orlando. I think Orlando was a fine event. The people who did attend seemed to enjoy it a lot. There were some hiccups, but the fact that Andy Warren and co were able to put on a SQL Saturday in October was good. It was a good experience. It was a great time to get to see some people that we literally haven't seen in a year and a half, and I think there's a lot of utility in that, but there's also a lot of I guess I'll say risk in a couple of aspects. One of them is for Orlando, they normally get 500, 600, 700 people for a SQL Saturday. Oh no.
Yep.
Oh, there we go.
The frozen.
Yeah, I had a
Yeah.
little blip. So Orlando normally gets 500, 600, maybe 700 people for SQL Saturday, and um, they had about 60 to 70 people this year. So massive difference. And for an event like ours, where we cap out at like at 200 to 300 people, if you, I don't think there would be a linear extrapolation there, but I would also expect we'd fill one medium-sized room. So
Hmm.
that's the thing where I don't think it's worth it, especially having to try
No.
to find a venue, probably having to pay for venue because universities aren't going to host anything. Granted,
Right.
if it's that small, you just say, well, we have a one-track SQL Saturday at some place, and now you're saying, is that worth it?
Yes.
And the answer is
That's the whole sponsorship thing that you brought up to before we went live. That's totally valid. Nobody knows how the sponsorship scene is going to look like after all this. It's too early to say, but unlikely there's going to be people throwing a ton of money at any events very soon.
yeah, I think you're right. You'll
Yeah.
see some money at some of the big events. Like I know that
Yeah.
some organizations have marketing budget to burn, but
Mm-hmm.
that's because they, but they also expect some ROI, and they
Mm-hmm.
want expectations on how many people will actually be there. Because if it's a medium-sized room, if it's 50 to 70 people,
Mm-hmm.
some organizations will still sponsor. They might sponsor at the
Mm-hmm.
lowest tiers, but you'll still get some people, um,
Mm-hmm.
but not very many, and not enough to put on a grandiose SQL Saturday. Although, in fairness,
Mm-hmm.
if you only have 50 to 70 people, you don't need to book an entire wing of a university or
Right.
some of the larger events where we have need for 12 separate rooms. If you get it down to 3 rooms,
Mm-hmm.
um, the
Mm-hmm.
prices go down a lot correspondingly. And it
Mm-hmm.
also opens up the possibility of some businesses possibly hosting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Though with that, there's still a lot of question up in the air of venue and the like.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so got a Marshall says everyone's afraid right now, especially after Omicron's appearance. Yeah,
Right.
when Omicron transformed from a truck into a virus, that was
Mm-hmm. I didn't know it is name of a truck, Kevin.
crappiest
Is it?
transformer ever.
Oh.
Uh, how many might show up for a big planned event, which will be unpredictable until the very last minute, since conditions may continue to change? Yeah, and even so, also the idea that people have gotten used to, oh, wait, you mean this is an in-person, this is not a virtual event?
Right.
Because there were a fair percentage of people for Orlando who signed up thinking it was either online or hybrid. And when they found out it was in person only, they're like, oh, yeah, I can't attend that. So that's just a factor that we'd have to play with. We'd have to try to figure out. Um, and I will say, if there is a groundswell, if there is enough support where people say, yes, please do give us the SQL Saturday Raleigh, then we'll work it out.
Mhm.
We'll get the planning together and host it someplace. We'll
Yeah, I agree with that.
do it in a backyard with projectors. If there's an effective way to do hybrid, that might work. Effective hybrid is difficult, but it is possible. It does require audio engineers, video engineers, and um, you can do it. Like we were doing it for user group meetings. So
Mhm.
you probably need to have one engineer per room. And I've seen
Mhm.
conferences do this, like DerbyCon for most of its time. They had all of the audio equipment, the video equipment. They would record everything. Now they weren't streaming it live, but
Mhm.
they did have an AV person per room, and all of that stuff set up. The major addition would be the requirement of enough bandwidth. So you'd have to be in a place where there's sufficient bandwidth to guarantee that you're able to push, and that can be difficult, especially if you're talking universities where you're on shared bandwidth. Hopefully, that's good enough for your sessions. Oh, by the way, we block port 80 or port 8080 or whatever you're trying to access through Azure.
Yeah,
Block
whatever you're
that.
using.
Having to get dressed, yeah, having to get dressed and making lunch, Mike, it's got to be a terrible life for you.
Oh
It's
my
true to
God.
get. I mean, to be honest, like get in the habit of like just. I don't have a long commute, but just if you want to exercise, get your
Well,
lunch.
I like dressing nicely in winter, to be very honest. I miss that. One of the pleasures of winter itself is being able to dress really well and go and that's totally gone. And sitting in your pajamas is not the same thing.
No, that's
I
true.
don't
I
know. That
mean,
might be just me. Yeah.
yeah, I'm dressed very formally. I am dressed at 100% of my level of formality. I'm always like that, which actually is pretty close to true. Uh,
Isn't your best dress shirt say Splunk on it or something like that?
well, uh, that's the back of the T-shirt, not the front.
Oh, my bad.
Yeah, so kind of like the moderator person per presentation or room that's been done at some of the virtual conferences, but probably requires more equipment than those during doing remote virtual moderation, which makes it more complicated. Yeah, if you're doing hybrid in person online, there's a bit of equipment. I mean, really, uh, you could get away with two or three things. You're going to need a laptop per room with a capture card per room and a camera per room and also a microphone. Yep, a microphone or speaker system. So for the speakers, it'd probably be a little lapel mic that you would put on them and hook that up. So yeah, there you go, a lapel Jabra. And with those are the major pieces of equipment. You have OBS Studio on the laptop and uh, broadcasting it. Broadcasting it would get a little difficult because it wouldn't be, for example, to Twitch because hey, Twitch has one broadcast per channel. So maybe it would be some other service that has multiple substreams, and then you'd be able to push out. But if you have a four-room event, that's four laptops, four cameras, four capture cards, four microphones, which are not going to get reused regularly. I think that's going to be one of the most difficult parts. Or you're paying someone to rent equipment, which can get a little weird price wise. Solomon says also need to consider health requirements, expectations, level of enforcement. You have policies that have to be stated up front and very clear. Some people won't attend with requirement X. Some people won't attend without requirement X, and it all gets very political. So yeah, that's true, and that's the type of thing that we understand, and also makes me dread doing it a little bit.
Yes.
But if there's a massive groundswell where people say do it or riot, then we'll figure that stuff
Because
out.
almost all events are, I don't know how Andy pulled it off and what are the laws in Florida and all that, but most places that loan you a space, even if they happen to loan you a space, are going to be worried about the consequences, like what if there is an infection, what if somebody goes and sues them, and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, those.
Yeah.
So in those cases, the venues always have riders that basically say we're not responsible for any sort of issue that comes up along those lines, and also require event insurance where the host
Yeah.
has to carry insurance, which usually contains riders. Those are riders typically for liability.
But I don't think those insurances we used to take had any illness on them though
No,
before this. They didn't.
nope.
I've taken plenty of them. So this is going to be new, how all that changes.
Right. It'll
Right.
it'll probably make event insurance more expensive if the venue
Correct.
requires it, but
Right.
the venue is going to do their best to basically say it's not our problem.
Right.
So we absolve ourselves of any issue along those lines. Red Nello says
Right.
rioters. I thought you said rioters.
I kind of did too, and then I was like, oh, wait a minute.
That's my Midwestern accent where I would pronounce both words almost the same way. So that makes sense. But uh,
Give us sequel ticks and trips. Ticks, trips, tips
ticks
and
and
tricks.
trips. That's
Good
our new
save.
outdoor session. My favorite thing. My wife works in public staffing thing for the state government, and she works as doing accounting for, say, a water company wants to raise its rates. So I talk about those as RATE cases, and they come off as something that I can't say on Twitch without the risk of some automated machine saying, "Hey, wait, what is this stream about now?" So whenever I talk about that, it's always rate cases with a hard T. And then even then, half the time people are like, "Wait, did you just say?" Like, no, I did not. I said. Tss. And along those lines, yes, along the lines of rate cases, basically anything else that, as an organization, as TriPass, that we're able to do to make the experience a little bit better. Uh, if you want to talk to me in private about that, hit me up on Meetup. Hit any of us up on Meetup or email or however you can get a hold of us. Um, if you're the person who's taking Solomon's pieces of pizza from his mailbox that we definitely mail him for each meeting, uh, you know, I guess hopefully you enjoy those. But also write us. Open to whatever ideas to make 2022 a better year in terms of what we're able to broadcast. So the next thing that we've got on the agenda, assuming that people don't have other things in mind, which if you do, put them in chat. But next on the agenda, we want to talk about a post that Mala brought up from Eric Darling. And I'm going to drop the post in chat. This one is about temp tables and plan cache pollution, which is a fairly interesting post where Eric found out about this optional SPID column in DMExec plan attributes. And he noticed that there are times when you can have this optional SPID be populated with a non-zero value. One of the cases that he was able to find that causes this is temporary tables. And especially in cases where you create a temp table with the same name and definition in different procedures. Like say you have a parent and a child procedure, and if you have um, the same table name, the same table definition, you can end up with multiple records in the plan cache that have different optional SPID attributes, which will cause you to have multiple versions of this plan in cache, because if you execute this on different sessions, you're going to have a different optional SPID value. Although you were mentioning, Mala, that you were able to find cases where optional SPID is set even out when temp tables are not involved.
Right. And my suspicion, my theory on that, and this is just a theory, I haven't totally tested it out, I did not have time. I suspect that thing is populated for table expressions also.
Mm.
Because what Eric makes a claim at the beginning of the post that with that DMB based query, that if you run that query and it returns results, that means you have this plan cache pollution problem, and that doesn't seem to be the case. I checked a couple of procedures that were there when that thing returned results, and they had table expressions in them. So I suspect it's populated not just for temp tables but table expressions also. But I could not verify that. That claim is certainly not true. That if you run the DMB query and it comes back, that you have that problem. But the rest of the blog post is true. I verified that if you reuse temp table names, like what he says, across nested stored procedures, or call the temp table within a nested call, then you get multiple plans. That is absolutely true. So that is something we may need to watch for, because reusing temp table names is seriously common. I know I do that quite a bit. I didn't think there was anything to it, but apparently there is.
Yeah. I mean, how often do we create pound temp or whatever?
Mhm.
So reusing those names. Now, is it just the name, or is it the name and attributes have to all be the same?
I think it is just the name. When I did some tests, it was just the name. But does he say that it's attributes also? I don't know. I'm not sure about that. I think it's just the name.
Okay.
Yeah,
Uh,
but it's an interesting find for sure.
Definitely. Yeah. This is
Yeah.
one of those things where you see some of the work that goes on in the optimizer, and trying to make the best sense out of all of the craziness that people put in.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of respect for anybody who writes database optimizer, because there's a
Oh
lot
my
of
goodness.
crazy. There's a lot
Yeah.
of crazy that we can write as developers.
So do you all know Eric?
I
Yeah.
have, yeah, I've met Eric a couple of times at different events, and I do enjoy his blog a lot.
He seems like
Yes.
he has a sense of humor because his testimonial is 0 out of 10, not enough index rebuilds.
So he used to work for Brent Ozar.
He
Oh,
And
he
did.
did?
a little joke on the side is he is a fairly recent person on Twitter. So when Brent used to say Eric Darling for a long time, I thought he was referring to his wife, because his wife's name is Erica, and Darling is something, his wife, right?
That's
So it
right.
was like, okay, for a long time I thought his wife was getting into SQL Server related stuff. She
Not
is Erica with a K.
right.
That's
It was
hilarious.
funny.
So Eric also has a book that's called Nice Post Brent,
Yeah.
which was a compendium of the different blog posts they did at Brent Ozar's blog. And what would happen is, oh, this is Brent Ozar's blog. It doesn't matter if it was Kendra Little or Jeremiah Peshka or Eric Darling or whoever writing that. People would always respond in chat, "Nice post, Brent," because they think it's Brent. And that turned into the title of the book, which every once in a while, Eric has Joe Obish posting on his blog, and more than once I've
Uh-huh.
caught myself right before hitting the submit button on Curated SQL, where I wrote down Eric Darling, and then I go and check, like, wait, that's not Eric's writing style, and I check, oh, that's Joe Obish. I better change this. I almost did a nice post, Eric.
Well, he's another person who is quoted as a satisfied customer. It says, "quote I learned everything I know from Eric, Joe Obish."
No, Joe is a brilliant guy. He is,
Snarky.
yeah, he is
It's fun.
incredibly detail oriented, and some of his posts on there are just extreme depth. So that's the crux of that joke. Um,
Well, I'm sticking. I did buy Brent's course, so I'm sticking with that for 2022. It's gonna take me a while to go through that.
yeah, he had a lot going on in the sales. Now those sales, I believe, are all over at this point. Now that we're in December, but
Hmm.
that's okay. So, Mike, you had a link to an article from a person who was heavily involved in MySQL, and since you put it into Slack earlier today, figured let's talk about that a little bit. I'm going to pull up the article. You wanna? I'm catching you off guard with this one, but
Mm-hmm.
if you
Oh,
want
that's all
to
right.
talk a little bit about it while I pull up the link and drop it in chat.
So yeah, it was going around our developers at Duke, and it was essentially a blog post from an internals person who is well known, who works on MySQL at Oracle, and they're leaving to do Postgres at Google. And the post was a little bit of venting on Oracle's lack of investment in MySQL and being proud of just catching up on features that Postgres and SQL Server and other um, databases have. So, and somebody who's been on the inside for a long time and was very candid. So I think that it was very interesting because I think MySQL has been, for a lot of folks, the this is the wrong way to say it, but like it was the Postgres, right? Because it was open source and a lot of people used it and came up on it, and now a lot of developers use Postgres, and the Postgres arguably has more ANSI features than MySQL. So
Oh,
anyway, I thought it was interesting that it blew up, and then people were talking about it, and within our organization, everybody was really pleased with Postgres. It kind of turned into a side conversation about the benefits of Postgres.
yeah. I'm on record as saying that if you do use an open source database, Postgres is the best one. I won't even put a probably on that. It's the best one. It was interesting hearing some of that discussion. Now, I think as well, um, there may be a little bit of venting, like you mentioned, that uh, take it with a grain of salt. Yes, this person obviously does have a great deal of internal experience, but sometimes that getting so deep into the weeds, you know all of the flaws in the code in ways that a lot of users don't know, and that for a lot of users just doesn't matter. Uh, some of the some of the really good applications from the standpoint of users love this thing and it solves so many functionality problems. Like think of Excel. Um, you will you will claw Excel from business analysts' cold dead hands, and that code base, everything I've heard about it is a catastrophe. But the end product works out really well. And so internally, yeah, it can be really difficult to add certain new things just because of how uh, you're working with a code base. First of all, that's 40 years old. Second of all, has undergone decades of heavy development, and third, even in the 80s, that source code was apparently not very good for source code in the 80s. So you end up with that. internal bias, I guess I would say, that makes it difficult to understand um, from the standpoint of functionality. Does this solve the job that we want it to in the way that we want it to in a reasonable fashion? And uh, with that, I want to hedge hedge the statement a bit that hey, MySQL, I don't know. The author says MySQL is a pretty poor database, and you should strongly consider using Postgres instead. I'll take the second part for sure. Strongly consider Postgres, or strongly consider like a SQL Server. As far as MySQL being a poor database, I don't know. That's that I think is pushing it a little too hard. It is popular enough, it is in use enough that I don't think you could constitute that as this is poor. Um, Now, the main developers behind MySQL, as well as MariaDB, um, they historically have had a developer-centric mindset, and if it doesn't fit the immediate needs of application developers, they've tended to be pretty slow to adopt it. Like, foreign keys were not in MySQL until version 3.3. Prior to that, there was no need for foreign keys because why would you want foreign keys? They're just a mess. Yeah, um, but they're there now. I think I think that attitude has changed a good bit, and so I would say take this with a few grains of salt. Solomon mentions Jira and WordPress are very useful, but they have horrifying data models, and not exaggerating about the horrifying. You are 100% correct, Solomon. I've looked at the WordPress data model, and it's a joke. I have not looked directly at the Jira model, but even looking at just the API for it is an indication of, ooh, this is pretty ugly. SCOM and SharePoint Mala mentions, yeah, there are. I would say that the list of products that have good data models is probably a lot smaller than the list of products that have horrifying data models. I think that's just a classic developer problem. And even products from companies that you would think would do a better job of it, when you start looking into what they create, some of that's kind of ugly. Like I've seen at least one vendor who does SQL Server database monitoring. Their source code, or excuse me, not source code, their database objects and data modeling, all of that layout was hideous. You look at this and say, hey, no wonder your database is ranking in Query Store as some of the worst queries on the system, just trying
I
to
know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. uh, and so I think that's unfortunately the norm, but it shouldn't be. I mean, we do what we can to make data models a little less crummy, but yeah, that's I guess I'll end that little bit with this is a person who was disgruntled and wanted
Right.
to wanted to leave, ended up going to a competitor for a different company. So um, it's fair. I'm not going to say, hey, MySQL's code base is better than this, but there's a question of, well, he gives a point of where, hey, um, based on the limitations, the code base, the directions that is taken, it's impossible to do this thing that people want, or that some people want. So I think that's a fair point. The question is, if you go to a different product in a different company, you're eventually going to find the same thing. Solomon also says, for anyone that remembers that really fun site from around 2010, Extra Normal, apparently it was such a horrible code base and server configuration that all data was lost when they went under, as those who took it over couldn't put any of it back together again. They used to have a notice about this on the website after some company took it over. Yeah, you get to the point where there's some real nasty code bases in the world. And Malo was still.
I get to.
Oh, go ahead, Mike.
I sometimes come across that where it's like, I'm going to rewrite this because if somebody else, 2 analysts after me, has to use this, this is no bueno. This is obviously a smaller scale, but that choice of like incrementally improve versus refactor is a tough decision sometimes. But sometimes I just have to.
Yeah, yeah. Let's let Mala back in. Mala was so angry at that product that she just had to rage quit. Um, as far as it goes, though, I guess since we do have the time for it, let's a little bit of that discussion. Um, I think as developers, we have this internal model of this code is garbage, I'm going to fix it as our default response to I don't understand exactly what's happening. And because I don't understand it exactly, it is therefore terrible. And thus I must rewrite it. Um, I think that's a common enough personality flaw among developers that it's fair to generalize. And it leads us to places where we tend to rewrite a lot of code for not much benefit. Um,
Yep.
there's now, I guess I'll tell the story of Chesterton's fence because I think this is the level that we as developers need to be at in order to say yes, let's do this code change. Chesterton's fence is the adage that uh, somebody is traveling on a road and sees a fence that's just there. It's blocking the road, but there's not much around it. There's no obvious reason for the fence to be there. And so the person says, I'm going to tear down this fence. And his colleague says, well, hang on. Before you tear down that fence, why is it there? If you can't explain why the fence is there, then you shouldn't take it down. Only after you can explain why it is there could
Right.
you then make the decision, does it make sense to tear it down? Because it could be that fence that you thought, well, there's no reason for it to be here, that it was obviously put there by people for a specific reason. That specific
Right.
reason might have changed. That
Uh-huh.
specific reason may no longer be applicable. But
Uh-huh.
in a lot of cases, I've, I won't even say that I've seen it. I've done it where I will make a change because this code looks awful, and then find
Mm-hmm.
out that most of that awfulness was there because, well, for specific business requirements, we needed to have this resolved this way. But
Mm-hmm.
we also needed to have this other case resolved this way. And we also needed to handle these other things. And by the way, this service can fail, and this other service can fail, and it returns that it was successful. It's just that it doesn't give you all of the data elements that you need. And
Mm-hmm.
uh, something that should be a fairly simple piece of code turns into a much larger slog, simply
Mm-hmm.
because that outside world is so much more complex. And that's the attitude I think that a lot of developers miss, especially more junior developers, where I don't understand why this is so complex, therefore it must be wrong, and instead should turn into I don't understand why this is so complex, I need to understand it, and then I can judge whether it is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Because we just talked about, hey, there are a lot of horrible data models,
Mm-hmm.
and we can say that they're horrible data models. We have enough information that yes, we could make this better, but um, then there's the question of why do they end up that way, and we can create a just so story that ended up that way because, well, the developer doesn't understand how relational databases work, which is
Mm-hmm.
probably true. I mean, it's a fair assumption, but should also temper our expectations because they may have worked under constraints we're not aware of.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I remember I had this very experienced developer who was like, "You got to do it this way," and I had another one who was super good at multilingual and saying, "It's code. If it runs, it runs. Don't mess with it." So I kind of now I've come into the middle. I only if stuff works, I only change stuff if I feel like I absolutely have to. Otherwise, I'm just kind of, as you said, like, "Oh, let me stop and fix the fence." It's like, well,
Yeah,
it's a tough balance sometimes, but I really try to think like on my buddy, like on the shoulder, like it runs, Mike. You need to get this done.
Marshall follows up. Too many people take that I don't understand this, so it must be crap philosophy, and they also fail to understand all the evolution, all the fixes that have been embedded within this existing system that they don't understand. They don't even know what they
Right.
don't know. Yeah, that's a great way of
Yes.
summarizing it.
Yes.
It's that this is a historical document, and it doesn't mean you can't fix it. It doesn't mean there's nothing to fix. It could very well be you tear this thing apart because it is wrong or it is now wrong, but understand what it is intending to do, and that will help you understand better what it is that you can fix. And maybe you find out, well, shoot, this code wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was. I just don't like the variable naming scheme or something trivial like that. Where,
Right.
oh, or I want to change the ordering of a few lines of code, and now it makes more sense. Maybe I want to refactor this out into a couple of different methods.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but a lot of that comes with knowledge of the underlying system. And Solomon says, I don't know about that exactly. Uh, Although really I should have inflected it as I don't know about that uh, because that was in response to Marshall's. They don't even know what they don't know. And it's true.
Mm-hmm.
They don't.
Unknown unknowns.
That is a really useful paradigm. The concept of the quadrant of what you know and do you know that you know it. Um, and as developers, we do completely elide the unknown, the things that we don't know, and we don't even know that we should know them.
That's what got me about JavaScript. I was starting to make errors, and I'm like, I don't even know why I'm making them. I gotta slow down. SQL's a little bit better. SQL is a little better with that because that's been my whole background. And I start learning JavaScript, and I'm like, oh, my computer crashed. What's wrong?
In fairness,
I'm sorry, Mike.
JavaScript is a horrible language.
I'm not sure I want to be put in a place where I have to learn JavaScript. But
It's like,
Yeah, the JavaScript
yeah,
type
it's
system is a
trickier.
is a train wreck. And the fact that JavaScript doesn't have a standard library leads to the proliferation of node packages like is even. So the is even package in npm receives something like 160,000 downloads per day. And the is even package in npm is a one-liner that checks to see if a value is even, and it depends on the is odd package. The is odd package gets about 460,000 downloads per day. The is odd checks to see if a numeric value is odd, and is even is not is odd. So
Wow.
people embed this package, and you end up. There was a something that was done pretty recently of an empty React project. You have nothing in there. You've done no code. Just to get React to run involves about 2,000 external dependencies.
We've been arguing about energy, not arguing, just discussing it. We're starting like an energy subgroup, or environmentalism and tech and stuff. And we were talking about languages that use more or less energy, and some of the more modern languages, because of the layers of abstraction and C code underneath, they use more energy. So I'm sure JavaScript's up there. C was the most least energy intensive.
Energy defined how, as in.
I'll look it up. It was very interesting. I'll have to look it up.
Okay, because if it's that, I'd say, well, how about assembler? And we don't want to go back to writing assembler code. Anders isn't in the chat, so he may be willing to go back to assembler code, but not the rest of us.
Anders is not here, right? I didn't see him on chat.
No, he's out today. Unexcused absence. It's going on his permanent record.
They use 10 benchmarks called the Computer Language Benchmarks Game. Faster is not always more. It's of course it's got a lot of caveats. It's joules of energy consumed for doing certain tasks.
Okay. So Solomon put the extra normal archived post. We're currently unwrapping the technology we acquired and will evaluate if it is possible to reunite users with the projects they previously created. The previous website was complicated and was fragmented across many servers and storage services. It is presently unclear if everything exists to be able to feasibly recreate that system. That's crazy, but it does happen. And also, it's an indicator of, if you have an organization where your bus factor is 0, you could end up like that. And
what is 0, Kevin?
Bus factor. So bus factor is the idea that if one person on a team gets hit by a bus, can that team survive?
Interesting.
Now, I've also heard it as the lottery factor, where if that person wins the lottery and goes off to live on a remote island.
That's what we usually call it, but you're macabre.
Yeah, well.
But I don't know. Tech companies have a huge dependency on people like that. That is not enough concern around what happens if that person is not there.
Yeah. Now, in fairness, I tend to compromise and call it getting hit by the lottery bus. But yeah, so much of management. Actually, one of the major things about quality management is trying to raise that bus factor as much as possible. Trying to make it so that if one person leaves, everybody else can carry on. If one person's sick, or they have to go out for 2 months, or they win the lottery, or whatever, that your organization doesn't grind to a halt because, it turns out that only this person knows how to use the critical system that drives our company. Bus factor, Solomon, that's a term that's been around for a few decades. And even back in 2008, like he mentions, that was being thrown around then. Yeah, I remember references to it in books from the 80s. But we're at the top of the hour. We're going to wrap it up. Thanks, everyone, for stopping by. Remember,
thank you.
Not tomorrow, but next Tuesday, we will have John Morehouse talking to us about accelerated database recovery. So we hope to see you then. And until then, everyone, have a wonderful evening.
Bye.